joined by Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu, a member of the House Judiciary Committee, and MSNBC Justice analyst Matt Miller, former chief spokesperson for the Justice Department under President Barack Obama. Thanks to both of you gentlemen for being here with us on a Friday night. Congressman Lieu, let's start with you. The idea that the president isn't going to ask the nominee about Roe v. Wade may be secondary to the fact that this president couldn't hold back from asking people about loyalty in the investigation. That may be the biggest danger. Is he going to, in his interviews this weekend with one or two potential Supreme Court candidates, ask them about the investigation into him? And if he does that compromise a candidate?
Thank you, Ali, for your question. If you ask that question, I believe it absolutely compromises the candidate. I think a president under active criminal investigation should not be nominating a Supreme Court justice, and we should not be confirming a Supreme Court justice. But there's an equally compelling rationale for another reason why this shouldn't happen. I'll quote from Senate Leader Mitch McConnell during the Merrick Garland investigation, who said the American people should have a voice in the selection of the next Supreme Court justice. He held that vacancy open for 8 months. We've got elections in less than 5 months this November. We should wait till at least after November before looking at this issue.
Matt Miller, I want to just remind people of James Comey's testimony before the Senate Intel hearing on June 8th of 2017. This is an important piece of information that has now become newly relevant. Let's listen together.
My common sense told me that what was going on is either he had concluded or someone had told him that you've already asked Comey to stay and you didn't get anything for it, and that the dinner was an effort to build a relationship. In fact, he asked specifically of loyalty in the context of asking me to stay.
Asked for loyalty in the context of asking Comey to stay on as the director of the FBI. Matt, arguably, a Supreme Court justice is much more influential and for a longer time than the head of the FBI. So if the president was prepared to break with protocol and do things that people would think are at best unorthodox and unconventional and at worst obstruction of justice, and ask the head of the FBI for loyalty, there is some concern about what he will do at Bedminster when interviewing a prospective Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, absolutely there is. And you would think the staff would be smart enough to make sure there are people in the room with him. That dinner with Comey was famously one-on-one, and that they would warn him not to do something like that. But that doesn't mean that even outside of asking the direct question, that he wouldn't try other ways to ingratiate himself with this potential justice. I think the question here, that the principle that is so key here, is that, in our system of justice, no person is above the law. And that means no one gets to pick the prosecutor that investigates them if they're under investigation, and no one gets to pick the judge that hears their case. And it's especially important in this case because of the number of questions that could make it to the Supreme Court. I don't think the question of whether the president can be indicted will probably make it there, because I don't think DOJ will actually try to move forward with that. But there are other important questions, like, should the president be forced to submit to a subpoena if he's subpoenaed by the grand jury? Does he have the right to pardon himself, to execute a self-pardon? All of those things could make it to the Supreme Court. And you have to go back and remember that the president what he's under investigation for is obstruction of justice, for using his office to try to block the investigation into himself. That is the key principle, and that's why it's so important to be sure that he can't use his office here to try to thwart the investigation with a justice.
And ultimately, the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of this if it doesn't get settled otherwise. So, Congressman Lieu, Matt brings up an interesting point. The president never has to say anything about this to a Supreme Court justice for that Supreme Justice possibly on any question of the investigation to be compromised. And that is what Senator Blumenthal has said, that he's going to ask these potential nominees, or whomever the nominee is, to whether they will recuse themselves if facing a question of the president's investigation.
They absolutely should recuse themselves. And let me just say, why is it that we have all these interesting constitutional issues under Donald Trump? It's because of his behavior. We're looking at these issues for the first time, such as, can the president pardon himself? Can the president be indicted? Why we even ask these questions? It's because Donald Trump is engaged in behavior that's way out of bounds for what a president should be doing, and he really should not be nominating a Supreme Court justice, and no Supreme Court justice should be confirmed until at least after a new Congress has been seated.
Congressman, probably most Americans have seen this exchange yesterday with the House Judiciary hearing with Rod Rosenstein. You were in that hearing. Rod Rosenstein was frustrated. He was frustrated by pressure from your Republican colleagues on him. But what do you make of the reporting now that Rosenstein is frustrated that the media and the White House have portrayed him in being pivotal in the firing of James Comey?
I agree that Rod Rosenstein has every right to be angry. The President of the United States should have told him he was going to fire Comey because of the Russia investigation, because the President told the whole world a few days after he did it that that's why he did it. Instead, he had Rosenstein write a memo, and then he used that memo as a fake cover story. He was using Rod Rosenstein, and I can certainly understand why Rod Rosenstein was angry about that.
Guys, thanks very much for joining me this evening.